Randomarc Entertainment presents ReD, Book 1, The Dark Pale Perspective. Written and performed by Niall Lashley Johnston. Chapter 35. Mechanisms. "He's been gone a long time," said Danika. "I'm worried." She was lying on her back, using a portable solder iron to rewire one of the fried panels on the left-hand side of the sliding passenger door. The EMP had caused some of the panels to overload. Before giving Danika this task, Martin had briefly explained that this armoured car was essentially a high-powered, weaponized Faraday cage on wheels, although there were certain parts of the vehicle, such as the entrances and exits, that needed to have gaps within them in order for them to be used as doors. This unfortunately created weaknesses within certain points of the cage's structure. "Where do you think he is?" she asked, thinking that if she made the effort to actually ask a direct question, Martin might make the effort to answer her. He had been largely silent ever since Arkham had left, and Danika wondered whether it was because he was also worried. But there was another reason too. Ever since Danika had met Martin Baldwin, he seemed to view her with a general disdain, bordering on dislike, almost like he'd seen her before, and he didn't like what he could remember. "I have no idea," replied Martin. He was using a travel-sized blowtorch to burn away some of the ruined wiring. Most of the damage was superficial. Because of the vehicle's structure, most of the EMP damage had done nothing more than overload some of the fuses that powered the critical and non-critical systems. It was just a matter of replacing them, and in some cases, rewiring. Danika sighed. "Aren't you supposed to be the ideas man?" Baldwin looked up. "What makes you say that?" "Well, Arkham talks about you like you always have a plan, like you always know what the next step will be. Isn't that true?" Danika was sitting up now, pleased that Martin was now actually making the effort to look her in the eye. "Usually, yes, that is the case. When it comes to things like fixing an armoured car, or hacking a computer that is linked to a device that controls a Swiss bank vault door. But when it comes to predicting his actions..." He paused, then looked away and said, "I got nothing." Danika pulled out her pack of Marlboro Reds and put a cigarette in her mouth. Baldwin glared at her. "Am I going to have to open the sunroof?" he said. Danika grunted, and as she inhaled the smoke and slowly blew it out, she shrugged and said, "Be my guest, but it's a safety hazard." Baldwin grumbled and carried on working. "What's the big deal?" said Danika, her frustration at this whole situation causing her to raise her voice. "It's not like it's gonna fucking kill you." Baldwin turned again. This time anger flashed in his dark eyes. "I just don't like smoking, alright?" He held her gaze for another 5 seconds, then added, "And for the record, I think you'll find that you're my guest." The car was high enough for Danika to stand up straight, so she did, and quickly. "Do you have a problem with me, or something?" Baldwin was frowning now. "Now where would you get that idea?" Danika sighed and shrugged, but there was a definite hard edge to her voice. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe the fact that you barely said a word to me since we met apart from minor pleasantries, and the fact that whenever you do speak to me, it's either to give me an order or insult me." Danika started to relax slightly. Her words represented a tension that was now being lifted, although that didn't mean that Baldwin was going to back down. "That's just who I am. Get used to it. Maybe you've become used to Arkham's boyish charm, his handsome face and witty humour, not to mention the voice. But me, I have to be fully interested in the person or conversation in order to form some semblance of a relationship. And this conversation we're having, this doesn't interest me. So it's ending here." He turned away, and Danika was left standing there. She realized she was breathing heavily. She took a drag on her cigarette and blew the smoke in Baldwin's direction. "What are you, 10? Snapped Baldwin. Danika laid back down beside the panel she was working on. Well, you're treating me like a fucking child, she said, now powering up the solder iron once again. While they were all travelling between Baltimore and Washington, D.C., Arkham had shown Danika some of the inner workings of the vehicle. He had capitalized on the weapon system's operation. Baldwin always insisted on being the designated driver. She was currently rewiring the panel that activated the minigun, which was stored in a thick door panel just above where she was lying on the outside. After letting the solder dry, which took seconds, she replaced the fuses in the power supply, making sure all the wires were properly separated. "It's ready," she grumbled and sat up. "So's this," Baldwin said, softly. The animosity in his voice faded to almost nothing. "What now?" asked Danika, heading to the back of the vehicle to check the state of the wall monitors. Usually these screens would be alive with news feeds and submission platform derivatives, but without power, they had no way of tracking the progress of either Arkham Void or the outbreak. "We need a battery," she added, tapping on some of the keyboards that were positioned below some of the monitors. They were detachable and can be used in any part of the vehicle for convenience. Each one also housed a mini monitor of its own, like a tablet with a Bluetooth keyboard attached. These were still on because they ran on rechargeable batteries and were protected by the vehicle's structure, but without any network connection they were useless. There were also multiple headsets that sat securely inside fixtures on the vehicle wall. Danika didn't know whether they were all multi-purpose, or whether each one had a specific use. Even so, she decided to grab one when Baldwin's back was turned, and slide it into the back of her metallic belt. She might find some use for it later, and she didn't want to bother asking Martin. He was now in the front left-hand corner of the vehicle, sitting in the passenger seat, rummaging in a compartment that Danika couldn't see. "What are you looking for?" asked Danika, realizing that Baldwin hadn't actually replied to anything that she had said since she got up from fixing the panel. She was about to say something else when Martin stood up. There was what looked like a briefcase made of copper hanging from his grip. He held it up for Danika to see. "This. It's a battery," he said. "Like you said, we need to jump-start the car." Danika frowned. "I didn't say that." "You were about to." This guy didn't even like her, and he was finishing her sentences. Not even that, he was vocalizing sentences that she hadn't even spoken. She shook her head to banish the slight feeling of nausea in her gut. Baldwin continued. "Once we've jump-started the car, I can re-establish a connection with the agency network and we can go and look for Arkham. We'll be able to locate him." Baldwin was cut off by a sound that made Danika jump with fright. It was a sound of screaming, but it sure as hell wasn't natural. It was muffled because of the vehicle walls, but it was still loud in both their ears, and Danika covered them slightly as she stood up. "What the hell is that?" said Danika, almost having to shout. "Whatever it is, it's angry," replied Martin. There was a soft popping sound, a galloping sound coming from what sounded like a couple of junctions ahead. It couldn't be more than half a mile away, maybe less. It stopped, and Danika put her hands by her side. She needed another cigarette. Seconds later she had one in her mouth, and was inhaling deeply. This time Baldwin didn't turn around to remonstrate, which Danika thought was surprising. "Finish what you were saying," she said, blowing the smoke upwards. Martin turned to look at her. "I was going to say that we can track Arkham's position from here once we get the power back on, but it sounds like we've found him. You don't think that was him screaming, do you? It can have been." "I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that wherever that noise is coming from, it's where the action is. And trust me, that's where he'll be." Danika nodded. "We still need to track him, though. Get an exact location so we can get moving." "Yes, that's the problem." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" Martin turned away. "You ever had to jump-start a car before, Danika?" Her frown deepened. "Of course I have." The screaming sounded again, even louder this time. Then, again it stopped. "Then you know what needs doing. When it comes to jump-starts, this car is just like any other." Danika put her head in her hands. "You mean, yes. In order to jump-start this thing, we need to go outside. We can't just drive away and pick up Arkham. That would be too easy. And, if I'm not mistaken, That screaming sounds like it's getting closer. Chapter 36. Love or Monsters. Part 1. Arkham Void was quietly flustered. When this thing, whatever it was, landed full force on top of the car, with a now dead human below him, he thought that it would be all the car needed to give up and send shrapnel flying in all directions. But it didn't. Instead, the car had continued burning, with the unknown creature standing above it, almost striking a victorious pose. So, the quarantine within the capital had failed miserably. Americans, Arkham muttered under his breath, now standing beside the burning car. Sir! Get away from there, sir! It was the boy who was shouting, and he was talking to Arkham. It's all right, kid, he said, without turning around. Then he added, I need you to find another way out of there. Try the delivery entrance. This... He pointed momentarily and regarded the creature, who was still standing on the roof of the car, its heavy breathing the only sound in the entire space. This, clearly, isn't a safe way out. And what if there are more of them? Came a voice from behind the little boy. Run, replied Arkham. Run as fast as you can, and get indoors. Grab anything you can defend yourselves with, and someone see that this boy is looked after. He pointed at the little boy, who still looked incredibly concerned. Not, it seemed, concerned for his own safety, but for Arkham's. He decided to dwell on this thought later. Now, though, he had to find out more about this thing. Arkham stole a glance behind him, and was pleased to see the victims of the accident finally making their way out of the delivery entrance of the shop, pouring out in fear. Running. The boy was being pulled away by one of the injured shoppers, and he seemed more than reluctant to leave. Arkham turned back, and in the next second there was an almost blinding flash of light. The force of the blast sent Arkham flying back through the other shop window and landing with a thud on one of the t-shirt display tables. The table split in half in the middle upon impact, and Arkham could still feel the intense heat from the fire as he hit the ground. He stared up at the ceiling above him. Ow! There was no pain there to actually comment on, but Arkham couldn't think of anything else to say. He shot back up and stole another glance behind him, see the last two shoppers shuffling out the back door. One of them turned back and stared, open-mouthed. He looked down at his hand to see the flames dancing round his fingers, almost like a fire-covered demonic coin. Damn it, he said, simply, before bringing his hand inches away from his mouth and letting out a fast wisp of cold air. The fire disappeared, and Arkham dropped his hand down. That wasn't very nice at all. He looked around him, and then his eye was caught by where he had just been thrown from. The car was in several pieces, and he could make out bits of shrapnel embedded in the front shop window. What he saw next made his fists clench. The creature was now naked, the fire having burned away its already ruined clothes. The source of the red liquid that Arkham had seen flow from the creature's torso and jeans was now visible, but it still didn't seem to be flowing from any particular point. It was just there, oozing out of every pore in the creature's body. The explosion should have taken that body to pieces, but it didn't. Instead, it had just forced the creature further back across the car park. Arkham had faced a lot of obscure, weird things in his time, but this was something new. New for Earth, anyway. Seems I'm not the only one who's slightly fireproof, he said, making his way forward. His progress was deliberately slow, but Arkham too struck a confident pose. He remembered the amount of living people that had been thrown away like trash by this creature, and there was only one, at the moment anyway, so it was safe to assume that it was very strong. Was it a he? It had been a man, once upon a time, so Arkham decided to stick with that for now. So, can you talk? He said, still walking slowly forward. Or did that virus give you the ability to slightly defy gravity and survive explosions but delete your mind? Because the mind's what it's all about. The creature roared again, the black goo still dripping from his mouth, making steam or possibly smoke rise from the tarmac. The unknown then raised up its hands, clenched them and slammed them down on the ground below him. Arkham witnessed the ground crack, almost into two pieces. A shockwave made the crack continue towards him, almost like some sort of ripple effect. Arkham could sense the force of the shockwave, and so he took to the air, leaping out of the wave and somersaulting to the side. He landed with his knees bent and right hand in the middle of his legs to steady himself. Then he looked up and over at the creature.
I'm guessing that's the latter then.
Arkham tended to resort to sarcasm when he was under attack. Martin often said it was a coping mechanism, something that Arkham resorted to when he was under stress. But he knew he had to keep calm and go on the attack. He lifted his goggles and fixed them to his head. He wasn't altogether sure what he was going to scan for, but he knew that any data would be useful data. He changed the filter to green to activate the bioscan, and wasn't surprised to see the word unknown for almost every reading. Blood type, heartbeat, cellular composition, they all came up with nothing. Nothing known. He cursed under his breath. What the hell was this thing? The other question that was rearing to confront him. How many more of them were there? He looked at the creature again. He was just standing still, as if he was being somehow cautious. Arkham couldn't understand why. Did the creature see him as a threat? Was he afraid? Although Arkham knew nothing about this creature, other than its amount of strength, its durability, and level of anger, he could smell fear a mile off. Maybe it was because the creature had expected Arkham to take the full impact of the shockwave attack. The ease with which Arkham had dodged may have given the creature pause. Was there even a thought process present in that thing's mind? Arkham looked around him, goggles still on, scanning the area. Most of the bodies on the ground were listed as deceased. All the civilians that had been lucky enough not to be in the creature's way were long gone, and Arkham Void was now the only thing standing in the creature's way, and that spelled trouble. There was a sudden crackle in his ear. His intercom. Martin must have got the vehicle's electrics back online. That was good news, and he hadn't had much of that recently.
Can you hear me?
The voice was female, with an edge of panic.
Danika? Yeah, I can hear you,
replied Arkham. His eyes were still fixed on the creature's black-green pupils.
Where the hell are you? We need help back here. Let's just say the quarantine failed, and I'm currently looking at the result.
Danika's voice was slightly raised now.
No shit, the quarantine failed. Get your ass back here!
Arkham frowned.
What's going on, D?
At the same time, he reached down behind his back to grab one of his favorite guns, knowing that he couldn't leave this thing standing. The gun was one of two customized Smith & Wesson Model 29 style revolvers. Arkham called them the Bulldogs. Small, silver-colored revolvers that featured an extended barrel. He often used two, but he decided to leave one in the armoured vehicle, just in case Martin and Danika needed to defend themselves. It sounded like he had made the right choice. He held the 6-cylinder gun down by his side, loaded and ready to fire. The radio crackled. The independent cell installed within the armoured vehicle was most likely acting up with all this electromagnetic interference.
Danika, can you hear me?
He removed his goggles now. The crackling sound came again.
Where are you? Hello?
The signal cut off, and Arkham Void thrust his other hand down by his side frustratedly. The only sound he could hear was the creature's heavy breathing. He was surprised how long the creature remained standing there, watching him. There was a fine line between not attacking because you were afraid and remaining stationary because you knew you were going to win no matter whether you made the first move or not. But Arkham was done waiting. He raised his gun to fire and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, and Arkham could feel time slowing down. Time always slowed down. The silver bullet hit the creature square in its right shoulder, and Arkham's opponent cried out in pain and anger. Up until now, despite a clear display of agility, the thing's movements had been almost zombie-like, alien even. But Arkham could see the humanity within it. Within him. The thing fell to one knee, clutching his shoulder. Arkham hesitated for just 1 second, but it was 1 second too long, and that was his first mistake. Upon clutching his injured shoulder, the creature had looked diagonally away from the wound, seemingly staring at the wet tarmac. The volume of red liquid began to increase, and that was when Arkham saw the rage, the humanity within the expression of pain disappearing almost completely. Still kneeling, the thing used the same hand it had used to clutch the wound to thwack the ground again, cracking it once more. But this time the shockwave was at least 3 times as powerful. It forced various pieces of glass and metal into the air, straight in Arkham's direction. He had to make a decision on where to go from here. But, Like a shotgun spread, it was difficult to pick one direction over another, so he decided to jump back, cracking off 4 more shots as he went flying back into the direction of the shop floor. The creature came at him then, almost joining the force of the shockwave it had created. Arkham didn't have quite enough momentum to go far enough to escape the creature's grasp. Upon contact with his neck, the thing's arm outstretched. Arkham roared with determination, bringing up one of his legs to catch the creature in the face. He missed, which gave the creature precious seconds to increase its grip. Arkham's air was suddenly cut off, and so his concentration was lost. Still in midair, the creature brought Arkham closer to its face. He was about to use his head to try and catch the thing off guard, but it was too fast, and was able to swing Arkham round and jettison him back in the direction of the burnt-out car. He hit the bonnet's shoulder first, rolled off it, and hit the ground with a thud. His pain receptors may have been dampened, but due to the force of the throw, he felt the pain, which was something else he wasn't used to. He recovered quickly though, rolled onto his back, and shot up, the added task of needing to work through the pain making his concentration return at a slower rate. He looked up to find the creature hanging from the ledge that led up onto the roof of the building. Arkham bent down slightly and pulled out his second-best handgun, a Glock 17 9mm pistol. The magazine held 17 rounds, and Arkham cracked off 4 of those in a space of 3 seconds. 3 missed, but 1 caught the thing in its left leg. Arkham heard the pain again, and again he hesitated. He shook his head to banish the almost feeling of slight confusion. The creature refused to let go of the ledge, and Arkham cursed. He stole a glance behind him. He didn't have the strength or the time to build up enough momentum to carry him to the thing's position, so he made a snap decision. He whipped out a minuscule tracking beacon of his own design and tightened it in his grip. He continued firing the Glock in order to distract the creature, and with his other arm he took aim. Normally he could insert this into the magazine of a special gas-propelled gun that fired out these tracers at a tremendous velocity, but because he only had one hand free, he had to make do. The creature was fast, and he managed to narrowly dodge all of the shots Arkham fired. Normally Arkham didn't miss, and the annoyance that he wasn't hitting his target got to him, but in the end it didn't matter. Bullets clearly weren't enough to stop this thing, at least not from this distance, but they were a hell of a distraction. Upon the second last shot, he threw the tracer. It catapulted through the air and jabbed into the creature's back, just to the right of the exit wound in his injured shoulder. The tracer he had thrown had within it a simple anesthetic. It wasn't enough to knock the creature out. Arkham doubted even elephant tranquilizers would bring this thing down, but it was just enough to make the creature unaware that it had even been hit. The spike that acted as an anchor doubled up as a syringe. If Arkham couldn't kill this thing, at least he could track its movements, as long as Martin got the servers back online. He didn't know how many of them there were, but keeping an eye on it would have to do for now. He fired off the last shot, which skinned the side of the creature's thigh as it hoisted itself up over the edge. Arkham cursed again. He checked himself. The pain in his shoulder and his solar plexus had subsided now, but he had injuries all over his exposed forearms and hands. They would heal up soon enough, but his pride would be forever bruised. He had got sloppy. Throughout his career at the agency, he had only sustained minor injuries, the worst being a blow to the head. The day that that had occurred would ironically never be far from his mind, nor Martin Baldwin's. Then it hit him. Martin and Danika were stuck out there. He needed to get them, and fast. But first, he had to get a sample of that liquid. In one of the pockets of his belt, there was a simple plastic syringe, and he used it to suck up some of the liquid from the ground. He knew that Martin would complain about the fact that Arkham didn't get it straight from the source, but right now he didn't care about that. What he cared about was getting back to the car. Whatever was happening back there wasn't good, and he needed to move. Now. He turned in the opposite direction of the building, and sprinted back in the direction he came in, hoping beyond hope that he wouldn't be too late.